forwarding. And so our first section is we're going to be talking about JavaScript statements, and this is going to be like almost like sort of absurdly basic because I just want us to understand exactly what we're looking at when we're looking at a statement in JavaScript. So I'm going to go over the most sort of basic details of how we write a statement. So I'm going to open up the console to demonstrate this. If you want to open up your console in Chrome and follow along, you can, on Mac, you can do Command-Alt-J. On Windows, you can do Control-Shift-J. You can also right-click and go to Inspect, and then switch over to the console. So I'm going to be just writing these statements in the console just as a demonstration. Mac is Command-Alt-J. Does that work? Are you in Chrome or a different browser? You got it? Okay, so we're going to talk about some syntax basics. So this is just to go over how we write JavaScript. So we've been writing a little bit of JavaScript already. So you have seen some stuff, but we want to go over some of the basics. So this is like a very simple statement or expression in JavaScript, and it has a few different parts. So we're going to talk about each one of those parts and how they fit together so that you can recognize. And each part of our statement is separated by space. So in code, spaces actually, tell our program what to expect. So when we write a keyword like var, we have to put a space after the keyword, and JavaScript's going to expect the new type of text after that. So this is a variable. We're going to talk about what a variable is today as well. So it's not like if you're writing a paper, obviously you put spaces in between words so that you can read them as different words. In code, our spaces actually signify that we're going to a new part of our code. So we have spaces between our keyword, our variable name, which we'll discuss in a minute, our operator, which is this equal sign, and then our data over here. You don't have to have a space before the semicolon. That's just the end of the statement. So the semicolon signifies the end of the statement. As you guys have probably noticed at this point, if you leave out the semicolon, it's still going to work. So you don't necessarily have to do it. But it's best practice to include the semicolon. So if I'm going to write this statement, I would say variable sentence, space equals, and then double quotation marks, hello world. And so my the other side of the statement is data. In between the quotation marks, the space no longer is read by the code. It's part of this data. There's a space in the data. Remember, that type of data is a string, which is just a sequence of characters. And a space is actually a character in that sequence. So the space has a character code just like H or E or L, but it looks to us like a gap in the data. So spaces are a little bit tricky when it comes to code. There's some places where a space will break your program, and there's other places where it doesn't matter. So once we have this sentence, I can just type in sentence, and it'll give me that data in the console. So we need some space, but if you have a lot of space, it ignores the extra space. So for example, if I were to write something like this, and then put like a ton of spaces here, and then write hello world, it's not going to have a problem with that. So that's essentially the same thing, okay? So it ignores that space in my code. A space in data is a different thing. So if I take this same thing and I put a bunch of spaces here, that's actually part of my data. So it is going to remember that. Okay, so now my sentence has a whole bunch of spaces in it. Okay, so our code is going to ignore that, but our data will remember it. And that's actually kind of useful when I'm writing code. I might put parts of my statement on different lines, and it doesn't really matter if I do that, so it'll make it easier to read. So I can use spaces like that, but I can't, for example, if I wanted to have a variable called hello world, it's not going to let me do that. Okay, so I can't use a space in that part of my code. It's going to say unexpected identifier. Because when I'm writing code, I can have a space, but then after the space, I either have to have a different part of my code or something else happen. I can't have two variables next to each other. So that'll be a little bit more clear when we talk about variables. So the next part of this statement is the operator. And one thing that's a little bit confusing that we'll go over is in code, in JavaScript, in most languages, an equals sign doesn't really mean equals, okay? In math, when you say, x equals 10, what you're saying is the value of x is the same as the value of 10. But in code, that's not really what you're saying. It's a little bit confusing. What the equal sign actually is called an assignment operator. And what you're really doing, and we're going to talk about this a lot more with variables, is you're assigning a value to a name. So in the statement we have, the name is sentence, and the value is hello world. And we're assigning that value to the name sentence. And so the reason we want to do that is because we want to have a shortcut or a reference to different parts of our program, and we can use whatever name we want. So I can say sentence, I can say variable s equals hello world. There's some rules about how I name my variables, but generally I can name them whatever I want. And this isn't like an official thing, but what I'll often say instead of equals is gets. Okay, so when I say variable x gets 10, what I'm really saying is like var x gets 10. Even though it looks like variable x equals 10, I'll often say variable x gets 10 because what I'm trying to imply is that the value 10 is assigned to the name x. Okay, so it's not like math where two values on each side of the equal sign have to be the same. In programming, equals is adding or assigning a value to a name. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about variables tonight and in general. Okay. So if you want to read about variables, this is a good place to start. There's a lot of good info here on MDN. I'll include links like this, like references to different topics in the notes a lot, and I'll typically use MDN. It's a great resource for JavaScript, HTML, CSS, all sorts of different web topics. If you Google something like this, like if I Google JavaScript var, you'll see MDN. This probably comes up as the first result because I was just looking at it. You'll also see W3 schools. You guys have probably seen that before. They often come up first. Some people really don't like W3 schools. I'm a little bit ambivalent about it. I think they're fine. But you'll see other stuff. So there's a lot of, there's a ton of information about this stuff out there, but MDN is, in my opinion, the best resource. So that's what I'll usually link to. All right, so this statement that we just wrote actually involves two different processes. Variable s equals hello world, or gets hello world. The first part of this is called declaration. This is a big word that just means that we are saying that this variable exists. Okay, so when I say variable x, I actually don't have to assign it anything. I can just say that this variable exists and I want to use it later. And what that's basically saying, a variable, like I said, is like a name for some data, but we don't necessarily have to put that data in the variable when we start it, what we're really telling the computer, we can think of our computer as having like, millions and millions of little pieces of information on the hard drive. And when I say variable, what I'm really saying is like take one part of the hard drive and name it X, and I'm going to put something in there, and I want you to remember that value so I can use it later. So that's really what a variable is. It's like it's a placeholder or a nickname for some data so that the computer will remember. So the first part is declaration. We're just saying that this variable exists. And the second part is assignment. So I can say x equals 10. And now x is no longer undefined. It has this value inside of it. And so if I ever say x again, it'll always tell me the value of x. If I try to use a variable that doesn't exist, for example, if I say y, it's going to give me an error. Y doesn't exist because I haven't declared it. So I can declare y, and I can also assign it at the same time. So let's say y equals 100. And so now I have x is 10, and I have is y, and I can do stuff with them. I can draw a circle. I can, add them together. I can say what's x plus y, and it'll tell me. So I have these two different names, and I've assigned them different values, so I can use them in different parts of my program. So declaration and assignment are the two separate parts. And once I declare a variable, it's always going to exist in my program. So I still have x, I still have y. Once I create a variable, I don't have to say var again. I can just use the name that I created. So I had sentence earlier. I can get sentence back just by typing it out again. And if I have a value and I want to reassign it, give it a different value, I can say sentence equals new sentence. And I don't have to use var because sentence already exists. So I only have to use var with a new variable once. So I can do that. Let me do that. One weird thing about JavaScript is I can actually assign variables that don't exist. So I can say like z equals 50, and it's actually going to let me do that. But what's really happening is JavaScript is saying, you don't have a z, but I can see that you're trying to assign something to z, so I'm just going to make z for you. So it's a little bit tricky like that. Sometimes you'll get errors, like if I say like, what's another variable that I haven't used, like q, that's going to be undefined. But if I say q equals 1, it'll just make it for me because it's saying, oh, the programmer wants to make q, but they forgot to declare it. I'm just going to do it for them. So JavaScript has these kind of like built-in weird things where it's trying to help us out a little bit. And sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not really. Okay. So when you declare and assign a variable in one statement, like we do here, var a equals 10, this is called initializing or initialization of a variable. So it's another big word that just says what these two things are together. So if you ever hear me say you need to initialize your variable, that means you have to make the variable and give it some value. So a lot of big words that you just have to know for JavaScript. We already kind of talked about data types, but just to go over it again, we have numbers and strings. So we have variable a equals 10. We can also say a equals 10.5. We'll get that. I don't know why I'm saying 1 over 0 is infinity. I guess just to show that, if you do something that's equal to infinity, it just says infinity. It's not super useful. So then we also have, oh wait, this is for, so, okay, yeah. If you see nan, I think we talked about this at one point, but I don't remember. But if you see nan, that basically means not a number. And that's going to happen if you try to do something with a data that's not a number. So if I say variable a equals 10 instead of the number 10, So now it's a string. It's not actually a number, right? It's just TEN. It's just a string. We recognize the word, and it means the same thing as the number, but it's not a data. It's not the type of number. So if I say number of A, it says not a number, NaN. If I say type of A, it's going to tell me string. And if I try to do stuff with A, like if I try to say like A times 5, I'm going to get not a number. Okay. One kind of weird thing is if I say like A plus 5, it's just going to actually add 5 to my string. So this is another weird JavaScript thing where this doesn't actually make sense. I'm adding a string and a number, but it's basically just going to say, you know, they are trying to add a number to a string, so I'm just going to make it into a string for them, basically. So another weird thing with JavaScript, but I don't think you have to worry about that too much at this point. So strings, as we've discussed, are strings of characters. Usually they're going to be some type of data, like a text message, your name, a username, a password, something like that. But it's stored as just a sequence of characters. And we can actually add strings together. So if I have S equals hello, and I have name equals Jerry, I can say S plus name, but that just puts them right next to each other. So if I want a space, I actually have to put that in there. So I can say S plus a space plus a name. So I can add data to variables which represent data. So I can use the variables in different contexts. All right. So yeah, as I mentioned, once you have a variable, you can change it using an operator. So if I have a variable x equals 0, and then I say x equals 10, it just it just throws that value in there for me. If I say x equals 10 plus 20, it's just going to give me that value. And in JavaScript, I can actually just change it to a completely different data type. I can change it to a string, and it's not going to give me any problem with that. Some programming languages will. They want you to keep, once you create a variable that's a number, they want you to keep it as a number. But JavaScript doesn't make us do that. Okay, so we have a bunch of operators. We've already talked about most of these, but an operator is basically any symbol. Most of them look like math symbols, some of them don't. But an operator is any symbol that's not your keyword, it's not your variable, and it's not your data. So in this statement, variable is a keyword, x is my variable name, equals is my operator, it's my assignment operator, and then I have 10 is the value, and then the semicolon, I guess the semicolon is probably an operator, but it's just ending the statement. So then I have variable y equals 20. So x plus y, in that statement, x is a variable, plus is an operator. We're doing an operation on the two values, and y is a variable. Same with minus. If I say x minus 5, x is a variable, minus is the operator, and 5 is just a number. It's just a piece of data. And we can group our operations with parentheses. So if I say x minus y plus 5, that's going to do y plus 5 first, and then subtract that sum from x, which gives me the negative 15. So those are a couple operators. We also have multiply and divide. So 2 times 2. It's actually the asterisk, but that's what we use to represent multiplication. 2 divided by 3. So we can multiply or divide. Those are also operators. The plus sign turns into a different thing when we're using strings. So this is a little confusing. But when I say 2 plus 2, what I'm doing is addition, right? I'm adding two values together. But if I say 2 plus 4, it doesn't give me 6. It just gives me this big string, 2, 4. So that's actually called concatenation. When you concatenate two strings together, you're adding the strings together, but you're not actually adding the value of the strings, right? You're just putting one string onto the other one. So if you hear that word concatenation, that's what it's referring to. Increment and decrement, we'll actually use these a lot. Decrement sounds weird. I wonder if that's actually the right word there. Saying decrement just sounds weird. I feel like that can't be. Yeah, I guess it is. Anyway, so these are shorthands for very common operations. So if I have a variable x equals 0, and I want to add to it, one way I can do it is I can say x equals x plus 1. That'll give me the value 1. So it takes the value of x, which is 0, it adds 1 to that, and then it assigns that sum back to x. So this is something that we actually do a lot in programming. We are going to take a value and we're just going to increment it, step by step. And you can imagine a lot of things that would be useful for, right? Like animation, if we're moving across the screen, or counting, if you have like a counter or a timer or something like that, you're going to be adding 1 to a value. So we have a shorthand for that. So instead of saying x equals x plus 1, I can just say x plus plus. That'll add 1. So, oops. So every time I say x plus plus, it adds 1. If I want to add more than 1, I can say x plus equals, and then a different value. So I can say x plus equals 2, x plus equals 5. So that's just a shorthand that you'll see a lot in different programs. I can also do x minus minus and x minus equals. We already talked about concatenation, so we can move on. So yeah, those are just like the real basic terms. I just want you guys to be familiar with those terms because you'll hear them if you're reading a tutorial or watching a video. They're going to use those terms when they're explaining how the code works. And they refer to very simple things that you see a lot, but it's the specific terminology of programming. So I'm going to stop recording and then I'll take questions.